Sports for Real with Coach Hall. Today we're going to talk about the 48 Laws of Power. Law number 2, never put too much trust in friends and use your enemies. In short, that means those people that you think care about you, when they get into a crunch, most of them are going to bail out. So you might as well pay attention to your enemies and see how you can extract something from them to move yourself in a forward position. Now, how does all this apply to sports? Well, there are a lot of different examples, but let's start with the back part of it first. Learn to use enemies. Well, the women's college basketball has been a hot topic lately, especially when you start talking about LSU and how they handled Caitlin Williams. Well, Caitlin Williams, to get to the Final Four, had to get through Louisville. Louisville was knocked off by about 14 points, but their star guard, Haley Van Leef, who was scoring 27 points a game, has decided to transfer to LSU after losing to Iowa in the regional finals. So if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. So now you join a team that just won a national championship, and you bring in more scoring offense and wisdom. Van Leef is a graduate this year. She still has 2 more years of eligibility as a grad transfer, with that extra year coming from COVID. So LSU is going to get stronger, but they still have to climb that mountain called South Carolina. Even though they won the championship, they hadn't proved to me that they can beat South Carolina, especially on a consistent basis. But the first part of that, I'd like to tell a story about what my mother told me once about a player who had played for the Minnesota Vikings in the Super Bowl. Now, this guy was living in my hometown, but I had no idea who she was talking about. You know, being from a small town, you pretty much know all the people who had made it to the league, but not necessarily the case. If you go back to the beginning of last year, and the NFL does this every year, they run videos of teams and great players of the past, and they tell those stories to keep fresh in people's minds. Well, they were doing the one last year about the rise of the Steelers, the 1974 champions. Well, Mean Joe Green was pretty much telling the story, and he was telling how when Pittsburgh got down to New Orleans for Super Bowl IX, they were playing against the Vikings. And if you know anything about Tulane Stadium at the time, you know, this was before they had the Superdome, both of the teams came down the same tunnel. And that's common in a lot of the older stadiums, especially back then. So on the way out to the field, one of Edwards, not Edwards, but one of Green's teammates, Glenn Edwards, I know him to be from Florida A&M. So he was saying that Edwards saw one of his college teammates in the tunnel, and he just tried to say hello to him, you know, on the way out to the field. But the player wouldn't say anything to him. So Edwards said it again, you know, how you doing? Guy wouldn't say a word. So Green went over there and said, well, buckle up. You don't want to talk? Buckle up. Well, come to find out, the player he was talking about was Charlie Goodrum. Goodrum was from Miami, and he played for Florida A&M, and he went to Minnesota in 1974. Just so happened, that player that my mother was talking about happened to be Charlie Goodrum. Never got a chance to meet him. I heard a little bit about him, and by the time I found out more backstory on him, he had already passed. So it's kind of interesting to have a guy like that come from your hometown. But how, well, not come from your hometown, but he passed in my hometown. How he came to be in my hometown, I have no idea. But the point that I'm trying to make here is the first part of law number 2 about your friends. Not that he put Edwards down, but he could at least acknowledge Edwards, even though these two were going to be combatants in the game. You know, being that Goodrum was an offensive tackle, he was going to probably end up blocking Edwards at some point. So he got his mind focused on the game. You can't really fault him for that, but at least acknowledge your friend on the way out to the game. And they just let you know the difference in the level of tightness of the teams. Pittsburgh came in loose even from the start. They put their bags down and partied for a couple of days before they got down to serious business. The Vikings button up all the way, serious and tight, just like the Colts were in Super Bowl III. Also, Super Bowl XI under Bud Grant, same coach. They had made the statement, some of the older players say, when they saw the Raiders get off the bus in their motley uniforms and jeans and beards and everything, they knew they had lost the game because they were loose and here you are tight. So Even though they lost to Pittsburgh in Super Bowl IX, they lost to Super Bowl VIII in Miami, they lost to 4 in Kansas City, all because they were too buttoned up and too tight. Dick Vermeil, he had to learn the same lesson when the Eagles went to Super Bowl 15 against the Raiders. They came in the same way. But he learned when they went to the Super Bowl against, who did the Rams beat? The Rams won the first Super Bowl against the Titans in Atlanta. They were a whole lot looser football team, and that made the difference in the end. So, but the point is, if you have a friend, acknowledge them. Don't turn your back on your friend, even though you guys are going to be combatants. You can talk later, well, at least acknowledge that player in some kind of way, and then maybe Edwards wouldn't feel like the man was turning his back on him, But then again, you look at it from Goodrum's point of view. You might have been trying to set me up or make me look bad because you know how I am before games, being that we played against each other. But it's kind of a tough conversion of the law to sports, but that's about as close as I can come with that. But Goodrum, he refused to acknowledge Edwards' presence in the Super Bowl, and that applies to the law. Never put too much trust in your friends because they may just put you down in a hasty moment. So, sports for real.